Hello, welcome to How to Bring About Finance Transformation on Your Own Terms. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, we would like to share some information regarding CPE credits with you, and we appreciate your patience. Today's webinar is worth one continuing professional education credit. Please be sure to enable your media player to hear audio. To be eligible for CPE credit, you must answer at least 3 of the 4 polling questions on the slide screen during the webinar and have a total viewing time of at least 50 minutes. Participants will have the opportunity to download their CPE certificate immediately following the webinar if above requirements are met. In accordance with the standards for the National Registry of CPE Sponsors, CPE credit will be granted based on a 50-minute hour. We are unable to grant CPE credit in cases where technical difficulties disqualify eligibility. CPE program sponsorship guidelines prohibit us from issuing credit to those not verified by the technology to have satisfied the minimum requirements listed above. I encourage you to download today's PowerPoint presentation, which is located in the Resources widget on the lower right-hand side of the screen. After the presentation, this webinar will be available on the FEI member site where you can replay and download. After the conclusion of the webinar, your CPE certificate will be available in the certification widget and will also be emailed within 24 hours should you meet the criteria. Below the speaker biography widget is the Q&A box. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and the speakers will answer as many questions as possible. Now, it is FEI's pleasure to introduce Brett Maher.
Thanks, Shivani. Hello, everybody. My name is Brett Maher. I'm a partner with PwC. Pleased to be with you today. And I lead our finance transformation practice within financial services. I've also got some experience in telecom as well as some high-tech firms and manufacturing back in the day. So looking forward to today's presentation, and I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you very much, Brett and Shivani. My name's John Hugo. I'm VP of Financial Products and Go-to-Market at Workday. I've been at Workday about 5.5 years, but 20 plus years of my career was spent in audit, accounting, and finance, most recently as SVP and Corporate Controller of Lifetime Fitness. We were a very early adopter of Workday, customer number 12. So I speak with a lot of CFOs, finance teams on the value of Workday. With that, Brett, I'm going to turn it back and let's get started.
Thanks, John. We've got a packed agenda today. On the agenda, if we turn to the next slide, please. Basically, there's a couple different areas we're going to cover. One, we're going to talk about, what is on the CFO mind right now, given digital, given COVID, given the change of technology and the disruption it's creating in the marketplace for not only the businesses, but also finance. We're going to then talk about how others are approaching finance transformation and how they're using some of the digital tools and something that we're going to talk about, a citizen-led approach versus the enterprise-led approach. Describe what a typical journey looks like for finance transformation. Obviously, everyone starts the journey in a different place and is focused on different problems to solve. So we'll talk through what a representative journey looks like. And then lastly, talk about talent and basically the workforce and how, again, the pace of technology change is changing the way CFOs are thinking about upskilling and training their workforce, in addition to how they retain and find new talent. So we're going to start actually with a polling question. If we can go to the first polling question, Shivani, we thought we'd get the juices flowing here and start with a question. And basically, we wanted to ask this group for their views on what are the priorities for your business, for your CFO organization. And we've got 6 choices here, and we'd like you to rank them basically by selecting the top 3. and then we're going to display those results to everybody. So hopefully you can see them on the screen. I'm not going to read them to you, but give you a few moments here to select the 3 that you think are most relevant to your organization. Once you've selected those 3, just click on the submit button and we'll give it about 30 seconds and we'll see the results.
Any predictions, Brett? I'm going to say autumn.
I tell you, John, good question.
I can't steer the audience, but I'm.
Well, we're going to see. I don't want to lead the witness here, right, John? But we're going to see in a moment here some PwC surveys from CFO organizations and see if the results here kind of match up with what what we've seen over the last year.
And there we go. So my guess was going to be the automating processes. So that doesn't surprise me a whole lot. Embedding ESG was, no one included that in the response. But number 2, upskilling finance staff and finding talent, and then also reducing the cost of finance. So it's great because all of these top 3, especially automating processes and upskilling finance, are a couple of the topics that Brett and I are going to cover in depth in a little bit. So not surprising. So let's get started and get into the presentation.
Yeah, thanks everyone for participating in the polling question. Shivani, we can go to the next slide, please. So now we're going to get into the CFO. And we thought we'd start, if you go to the next slide, PwC conducts an annual finance effectiveness benchmarking survey. And it's done cross-industry. So this is not just a financial services focus. And so we've gleaned a few items here and just wanted to highlight and underscore what others are telling us about what top performers and what good looks like. So, if you look at what our CFOs are telling us and you think about waste and the reduction of waste, management reporting, the FP&A functions always comes top of the list, and it did again last year. The CFOs feel like on average, 40% of the management reporting or FP&A activity is somewhat wasteful and not value add. It goes down a little bit when you look at general accounting. You talk about things like manual entries or maybe unneeded reconciliations. And then tax accounting, right? A lot of the waste usually crops up in the areas of data acquisition, trying to find data that's useful for tax compliance. The other thing that we'll note here is that finance teams, typically the higher performers have about 45% more staff, FTEs, engaged in business partnering roles, right? So deeper analytics, likely FP&A activities. The other thing on the bottom left there that you see is on average a leading finance function. We're defining those as top quintile, top 10%. They're spending 19% more of their time on data analysis rather than data gathering, which is interesting because it's not that big of a number, right? To kind of get from the median to the top quintile, which tells you that a lot of organizations are still struggling with how do we automate and provide data, expose data, make it available for our end users, our finance community in an efficient way. And then lastly, I saw 50% of the respondents said that cost reduction is top of mind for their CFO organization. And when you look at a median finance function versus a top 10% or top quintile benchmark, they tend to have about 35% lower costs to run the finance organization than those in the median.
Brett,
so go to the next page.
Real quick on that, Brett,
ahead,
the upper right hand and the lower left hand corner are tied together pretty well. Brett and I talk to a lot of finance professionals in our career, and we are finding a lot of CFOs, organizations wanting to be more of that business partner. And to the lower left, having that data available makes finance teams a better partner. So I look at those two as tied together really tight. And like this slide indicates, that really does set performers that are doing well apart from their competition. Next slide, Siobhan.
Yeah, well said, John. This next slide, if you go back to the polling question with the 6 items that we asked you to choose 3 from, really, we pulled that from the right-hand side, right? And you can see, the automation concept that we asked about was high on your list. These are data from our CFO survey over the last year. So slightly different audience. It's not necessarily a benchmarking exercise. It's more of a top-down. What are your priorities as a CFO organization? And those are the types of questions or responses we asked of you in the polling. So you can see your responses were fairly consistent. What was interesting was ESG did not really get any responses. We had 21% in the CFO survey. A lot of investor relations groups, a lot of folks that are looking at corporate governance and responsibility are trying to better understand, really looking to Europe, actually. Europe's kind of leading the way in terms of how they're expecting companies to disclose, their commitments to the environment, right, to society, and how are they responding, both in their financial disclosures and the way they conduct business. So we're seeing a lot of interest, actually, in the marketplace around that. We talked about the reducing the cost as a percentage of revenue. That's one way to measure finance, and that's actually the way that we measured when you saw the benchmark around 35% more efficient for a top performer, that's the metric. We're looking at the cost of finance as a percentage of total revenue. And again, there's other ways to measure that, but that's the one that we're looking at here. So again, I'm not going to drain this slide, so to speak, but again, key themes are automation, driving down cost. And, what I would end with here is, in my 28 years of finance transformation, I've spent 25 of those years in consulting, focused on finance transformation, 3 of those years actually in banking, working at JPMorgan Chase. I would say that the goal has not changed. Everyone wants to be a better business partner to the business, providing insights, and they're trying to figure out, how do we take the transaction processing and automate it? And I don't know, John, if there's anything you want to add based on your experience with Workday.
Yeah, and to your point on the tactical priorities, the first 2 or 3 there were great indicators that our audience had the exact same response. But the one thing I wanted to point out on the strategic priorities and risk column, the highlights in pink: challenges of the pandemic magnified that concern and shaped the post-pandemic business model. We've seen at Workday a lot in the last 6 to 12 months, the impact of the pandemic, which I would never wish anyone again. But the impact of that has really surfaced the need for companies to be more agile and flexible. So those priorities, I think, really became escalated in the last 6 to 12 months. Hopefully we don't have another issue like this, but if we do, I think companies want to be prepared.
So let's move to the next section. So we have this set up on, kind of what good looks like and what's on the mind of CFOs. Now let's talk about technology and how it's kind of fundamentally changing the way CFOs are thinking about the finance operating model. So let's get started. Move to the next slide. So the changing finance function, right on the top there, these are some of the drivers for change. And I'll say almost every CFO or controller or head of FP&A that I speak with, they're very much focused on doing more with less, right? I think that's one of the most important overlays. And so what's top of mind is, how can we get more automation than we have today, which we talked about. They're dealing with all their stakeholders, including regulators, but also their internal stakeholders that are constantly moving the ball in terms of what they need for them in terms of information, decision support, insights. And then recently, post-COVID, I think most of you are aware, the M&A market has been, just very hot, right? We have SPACs. We have a lot of new companies popping up, We have a lot of merger, acquisition, divestiture type activity, which makes the CFO's job harder, right? Running the business, but then also taking their eye off ball to figure out, how do we take advantage of these deals to make sure that we're getting the synergies and that we're, basically keeping the books in order. So if you look at the bullets beneath there, we touched on the digital enablement, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of what that really means. The other thing I'd say is there's a lot of focus on real time, and John could probably comment on Workday and how clients are getting out of the batch mode, right? If you think about overnight closing the books and kind of getting into a more near real time, kind of world in terms of the financials, but also the decision making and the insights from an FP&A perspective. There's a real need to kind of cut down on the cycle times, especially around the forecasting process, and all this is putting pressure on the teams, the staff. And again, we're going to talk about this concept of citizen-led, which is really also driving the need for upskilling. We're seeing a lot of new talent being exposed to a lot of new technology as technology continues to improve, and basically people are able to impart change and automation on their own without having to necessarily rely on IT. So the last thing I'll say in the gray box here, if you think about what triggers the need for a transformation, I mentioned before, everyone kind of starts at a different place and has different priorities, and oftentimes the goals of the endpoint look the same. But a couple items here. One, I mentioned the divestiture, merger activity can often spark the need for revisiting. Hey, how is our operating model for finance? How do we use technology? Are we efficient? Are we effective? Oftentimes people also are looking at their workforce and saying, wow, we really have a dearth of talent. Perhaps we have an aging workforce. Perhaps we've had a lot of attrition. That can often change the way the CFO thinks about transformation for finance. There's accounting standard changes that often provides a platform by which to invest and to get to a better operating model point on the spectrum. And then obviously there's good old fashioned, you got to reinvest in the back office in terms of the plumbing, the data, the technology, especially as we think about moving from on-premise solutions to cloud. John, anything you want to add to this slide?
Yeah, Brett. I love stories, and I have a fresh one from a couple nights ago. I was at a customer dinner, and we had invited the CIO and two of his direct reports, and the chief accounting officer and two of her direct reports. And the accounting folks couldn't make the dinner because they were working till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And it's funny because the technology team said, that's all they know. That's how they work. They haven't deployed Workday yet, but they're moving to digital, and the CIO and his team, who are very transformational mindset, they can't wait until the tool is deployed, and then hopefully the accounting and finance folks can see that you don't have to put in those 80-hour weeks anymore, and the tools that are available can make that happen. So that was just the other night. It was interesting, but you'd also ask about real time. And I did a webinar a couple months ago about trending towards 0-day or 1-day close. And, there's always exterior factors that impact close that maybe the enterprise tool doesn't manage, but we are getting there. And you're right, the batch process of old is gone. And if you start to add together during any single monthly close the amount of batch and wait processing, it adds up to a lot of time. And then you aggregate that over the course of the year. And then if you're public with your Qs and your Ks, having information truly real time in a matter of seconds versus waiting 6-12 hours for batches to run, that's a huge impact. And that's where you see finance teams starting to move towards that analytical role instead of that transactional role. So great movement there.
All good points, John. Yeah, I've definitely seen them moving towards real time. And then to the next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about, the fact that the goal of finance being a more effective business partner, that hasn't changed in 28 years. But what I tell my clients, what has changed is how you deliver transformation. And what this slide represents is this idea of a top-down approach versus a bottoms-up approach, or enterprise-led versus citizen. And if you think about in simple terms, what does citizen-led mean? Well, you probably have staff, or you have your own set of spreadsheets. They have their spreadsheets where they're trying to automate things with macros or formulas. They're trying to set up a retrieval of some data set that they use throughout the year or the month or the day, right, for financial reporting. And they're moving that data around. And then they may have moved to Access, Microsoft Access, or to some other, localized solution on their desktop, right? And of course, if you think about the enterprise on the left-hand side, they've always been very focused on how do we eliminate that, right? Some people call them UDAs, or basically little black boxes that we're trying to eliminate from a control perspective or from an automation perspective. Well, what I'll say is, if you think about those Excel macros and whatnot, there's a whole new litany of technology, which is more powerful, right? And that technology is becoming more and more powerful, whether it's end user reporting tools, things like Tableau or Power BI, or the reporting tools that come delivered with, for composite reporting with Workday, for example. The idea here is that the people can actually take more action as a citizen to get better outcomes around automation. It could be AI, it could be robotics. That's one thing that's really changed. And when I talk to my clients, and whether they're the CFO or the CIO, there's still the things on the left, right? There's still, do we do cloud ERP? Do we try to centralize or consolidate the number of general ledgers that we have? How do we do a better job of consolidating our financials with tools and techniques? Those things are, and those are still there. Those are still top of mind. They're big investments. They're big projects that are complex. But it's also balanced with the recognition that we need our finance people to be in the business of self-service, owning how they drive solutions, whether it's around how they acquire data and how they deliver reports to their users, their stakeholders, and doing that in tandem, working hand in hand with the IT organization on the enterprise-led. And look, typically enterprise-led takes more time. It's more methodical. It's more complex. And you still need that. But the citizen-led piece is all about, again, the tools and the rate of change is so great that people can actually, in finance, do more. Another good example of that is, and it's true with Workday, it's true with other cloud ERP packages, things like accounting rules engines, much more of the power has shifted to the finance staff, right? They can actually configure these things and take ownership of these things, whereas in the past, it required more programming, more coding. There's more graphical user interfaces. It's easier now for finance staff that have some level of technical capability, not just Excel or macros. They can actually take this stuff on and drive real change, drive real benefit. I'm going to talk to a business case for a big global bank that's taking this on in a big way. John, anything you want to talk about here?
Yeah, Brett. And when Brett showed me this slide and the term citizen-led innovation a couple of weeks ago, I knew exactly what it meant. Having been a customer of Workday when I was at Lifetime Fitness, truly enterprise-led innovation is still always going to be there, the strategy setting, et cetera. But now you truly have the power of having staff-level employees. And I'm going to give an example. Who knows the accounts payable function better than an accounts payable manager or clerk? But you walk by and you hear them say, God, I wish we could do this. Gosh, I wish we could do this. But now they have that power with a tool. And as Brett mentioned, the ability to configure the system to make it work for their needs, still maintaining controls. But this individual at Lifetime had a technical curiosity about her. She loved the tool, but she was in a clerk role, and she worked her way up to be part of an operations team that ran the functionality and the business process framework. So it's a great example of someone who was in a functional role that moved into more of an analytical role just because of that opportunity was there. So I love the term citizen-led innovation, and I'm going to steal that from PwC, Brett, but it's truly a change in how finance and accounting teams are working these days with cloud solutions.
Thanks, John. Let's move on to the next slide. I'm probably going to cover this quickly in the interest of time. We are going to have time for Q&A at the end here.
Yeah.
So, I talked about those citizen-led tools, and I think if you look at the top half of this page, clearly on the citizen-led front, there's a lot of benefits, a lot of immediate cost savings that can be reaped when you think about a business case for transformation. And there's implications, we're going to cover that in the last section, around what that means for the workforce, the need for training, and then the need for governance as well around how you deploy these tools and how you collaborate with the enterprise to make sure that you're not, creating, more maintenance, right, and less clarity in terms of how these solutions are being delivered and how they're being controlled and governed. But if you look at the bottom of the page, I mentioned a few. I just wanted to make sure people understood what we mean by the citizen-led tools, right? So I'm sure many of you have talked about RPA and IPA. We've got most of our clients that are beyond experimentation within finance, and they're actually at a point where they developed a center of excellence or they're working with the enterprise in terms of how they govern the use of a lot of these tools. And RPA is one that kind of was an early starter to that process, if you will. Visualization tools, moving on, beyond business intelligence and some of the data mining type things. I'm bouncing around here a little bit, but there's also things like AI, natural language processing. I've seen natural language processing used and AI and machine learning used for things like actuarial models, right? More predictive models to get away from actuaries having to be the ones that always come up with the assumptions or what the predictive outcomes might look like, using things called proxy models, for example. I've also seen AI used in helping with reconciliation and exception error processing, for example. And also, I've seen early stages of looking for commentary, whether it's in planning and forecasting or around the 10Q and the 10K as people describe their financial results in the MD&A. So I've seen a lot of practical application in those areas. Let's jump to this case study very quickly, because I want to give people a sense for what's possible here, the art of the possible. So I mentioned a global bank, and basically this was a client for PwC where they embraced, because of the size and complexity of this bank, they felt like if they were going to deliver finance transformation, they had to have a citizen-led component. And they took this on in a big way. And you can see some of the big dollar signs below. They basically found about $15 million of opportunity, right? Taking actual waste out, putting automation in across a variety of use cases within the controllership. So this was all focused on the global controllership. And they basically trained up about 80 plus people that became sort of power users that helped stand up a process by which they actually identified candidate processes and went through a governance process to say, yes, this is something that lends itself to citizen-led automation, right? The enterprise-led teams, if you will, the IT folks were part of that governance process and said, hey, this makes sense. Things like AI or Tableau. They used a lot of Tableau and a lot of Power BI actually at this particular client. A lot of RPA was used as well. And they took out a lot of costs, and we helped them to a point in the journey. And then after we stood this up, they carried it forward on themselves and continue to do so. And you can see some of the other metrics down below. 200 plus digital use cases were identified. 300 plus citizen developers were identified. And again, there was about 80. I know it doesn't say 80 plus power users, but it was 80 or 90 folks that really became kind of the champions of this cause globally within the controllership. So I'll stop there. I wanted to just make sure people understood that when we talk about this new balance of enterprise-led and citizen-led, that's a very real thing, and some of the opportunities and benefits are also really impressive. But again, it takes a balance, and you need to have governance processes when you deploy these things. John, anything else you wanted to add to this one?
Yeah, I think you just your very last word there, Brett, when you said you still have to have governance in play. I think that's really key. Keeping the internal control environment extremely tight. The machine learning aspect and the anomaly detection is something we're really pushing. A lot of companies with, 95% of their transactions are high volume, low dollar, pushing through repetitive transactions that we really look to automate, and that cuts down a lot of that time it takes to close. And a great case study. So I think we're probably ready for the next polling question, right?
We are. So the question here is, how would you describe your organization's level of digital finance tool usage? So we spent some time, I'm sure most of you are already aware of what these automation tools are, but we wanted to get your sense for how evolved your organization is. And you can see the 4 choices there. Robust being the top choice, and little or no, digital tool usage being kind of the bottom one. And there's 2 in between. So we'll give you 30 seconds to answer.
Yeah. We need Jeopardy music during the 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. So Shivani, let's see what the numbers indicate here. Some usage and adoption, so I think this question is probably a little based on your company size, complexity. I think a lot of large enterprise companies with large technology teams or very innovative leadership are trying to, they're getting pressure from boards and from executives to embrace automation. And if you're a smaller company, the costs associated with that, or just maybe the fear of using new technology and where do I start, may have you looking. That's probably, I would guess, some of the smaller companies are on that little or no digital finance tool usage. But that's just a general observation of mine that I've seen. So about where predicted, I would say.
Sean, let's move on to the next slide.
Yep.
So we talked about some of the digital tools. I think it's also important to talk about some of the enterprise-led technology. And, first and foremost, you see in the upper left, cloud ERP, and also cloud-based planning and budgeting solutions. I would say that from my perspective, cross industry, we're probably in the, kind of the 3rd inning of a 9-inning game. I always tell my clients, you're probably anywhere from 0 to 3 years from adopting cloud. And, the things that I've seen, especially in financial services, obviously, but this applies to others that have kind of made people pause before they make that jump is, number one, what is their enterprise IT strategy, and do they have cloud first? And maybe there's other areas of the business that are prioritized beyond finance, but also security. Concerns. There's still concerns around public cloud versus private cloud, and people are still trying to get comfortable with that, especially in highly regulated industries like healthcare, like insurance, but there's others as well. The other thing I would say is, when we look at these cloud type, these big ERP type implementations, and John's going to talk a little bit about Workday specifically. A lot of times we talk about using these citizen-led tools to kind of fill in the gray a little bit, right? In terms of perhaps automating some things that really can't be automated with the delivered functionality that comes out of the cloud ERP functionality. I think most of you probably know a lot of these cloud solutions have the leading practices built in. And so, if you think about how you process an AP transaction, if you think about how you register an asset, if you think about how you perform workflow for approvals on a manual journal entry, or you think about how the reconciliation process works between the delivered reconciliation tools or applications with the ERP itself. A lot of that stuff's built in. And so there's a real, and that was true for on-premise ERP. I think a lot of people forget that the intention for ERP back in the 90s and even in the early 2000s was you would always use the delivered functionality. The problem was it was too easy to customize, right? And IT invariably needed to respond to its business partners very quickly through customizations, right? And they went outside kind of the four walls of the delivered functionality. Cloud, I think most of you probably know, forces you to kind of use the delivered functionality. And so we still, again, a different angle here, we still see some of the digital tools that I talked about before, the Citizenled tools kind of filling in the gray in areas where perhaps it doesn't make sense to use the ERP or the delivered functionality in a planning and budgeting tool or something along those lines. We have machine learning here. We talked about the real time. And the other thing I'd say is, you see in the center there from a data perspective, a lot of these, you probably have cloud initiatives. I see a lot of the cloud data initiatives starting in sort of the customer or the customer experience or marketing and sales organization. I would say I see finance as being either the 1, 2, or 3 priority in terms of embracing cloud from a data perspective. And a lot of these cloud ERP applications, Workday included, have now a data warehouse type capability that complements the transaction processing that happens within the GL, and also helps you with your analytics at a deeper level. And I've seen a lot of focus on more thin GLs and using these data solutions that complement the ERP packages to get to better reporting outcomes, whether it's regulatory reporting, statutory reporting, or just getting deeper in terms of FP&A type analytics. John, anything else you want to add here?
Yeah, the one thing, Brett, on this is sometimes I think to finance staffs, the technology piece sometimes may feel a little overwhelming. All the new terminology. I think the best indicator in my background was 10 years ago when we were looking at Workday. I would report to our audit committee, we were public at the time, and our board of directors on, Workday, and there was a fear about moving information to the cloud, especially financial information. And they did not understand, but over time became educated. I moved forward to today, and I think most boards are asking their executive team, why aren't we moving to the cloud? And why aren't we adopting a lot of this new technology? Because the competition is. So looking at it from that highest level, people need to become educated, whether it's the board or your mid-level managers or your staff people, and understand how this can really help them. Maybe if we could flip to the next slide, Shivani. So with Workday, you hear the term single solution a lot, and Brett and I, in the last 35 minutes, have used the term real time a lot. Workday truly is a integrated solution, single solution. I don't even want to use the term integrated, where all functional areas, the ones you see here in our platform, whether it's project billing or talent in HCM or financials or planning, our business process framework is truly real time. And a change that's made, for example, in payroll will automatically move to planning and change those numbers in the planning module. So if someone received a pay increase, for example, that would happen real time. So it's not something, again, where you're running batches, but the power of the business process framework really, really automates almost everything in, I hate the term back office, from human capital through payroll, through financials, through planning, through analytics. And you can configure that business process framework without having to understand coding, without having to engage the IT team nearly as much. This is something that's really managed by the functional leaders. So when we say single cloud platform, we truly mean single cloud. It's not multiple SKUs that are tied together with integrations managed by IT. It's a single solution managed by the functional owners. So a huge difference.
Yeah, thanks, John. And a great example of even how some of these enterprise-led solutions actually can be maintained and owned by finance and basically the people within HR or finance in this case. Let's move on to our next polling question. So our next polling question, we talked about cloud and cloud adoption. So when do you plan to migrate your financial systems to the cloud? And for those of you that have already taken that journey, the last choice is likely yours. And then we have basically 1 to 3 years out is what we're looking at here. Give people a few minutes. Well, a few seconds, I should say.
Yeah. All right, Shivani, and the number one is, I'm going to guess 2 to 3. 1 to 2. Complete or in process. So about almost 1/4 of the audience is already in process or done. 1 to 2 years. So I think one of the biggest fears of moving financial systems to the cloud is the perception of the amount of work it takes to do that. And there's a little fear of moving from the comfort zone to the cloud. Again, it goes to education on what is the cloud. And I'm going to use my board example again. You have to, I look at IT, all of the changes in technology, all the changes in accounting rules and regulations, constantly changing, and it seems like it's only escalated in the amount of changes that happen every day, week, month, year. But I told our team that, do you want to pay your IT department to constantly be educated on that? Or do you want to put that in the hands of experts who own that, and that's part of your subscription fee to be part of the cloud? And that was kind of the convincing item that made them shift and say, all right, let's move. So 1 to 2 years migration, that's great to see more than half of the people really thinking hard about that. And it might tie back to that pandemic and the need to be more agile and more flexible. So let's move on to the next section.
And this is the last section. We have one more polling question. So what does this all mean, right? From a finance journey perspective, as I mentioned before, people start in different places and end with different outcomes. But in general terms, if you look at this next page here, Shivani, it's our page 22. And by the way, this presentation will be available for everyone after today's presentation if you don't already have access. But in simple terms, I'm going to go through this quickly. One of the first things I see a lot of my CFOs or controllers focus on is just centralizing, right, their technology platform. They might have multiple GLs, especially if they're a big global organization, and trying to really get all of that centralized, whether that's on-premise or in cloud. And likely many of you have already embraced some level of shared services and centralizing, your AP function, your GL, et cetera, can really be a great catalyst to enable that shared service capability. I do have several clients still that are amazingly pretty decentralized, where the business unit still performs a lot of the accounting and perhaps are still considering shared services. But I think most have already looked at that from an operating model perspective and have made some movements. Kind of the next stage of evolution is really getting a handle on your data. Kind of once you've got your accounting centralized and your controllership centralized, starting to really focus on the deeper data sets, trying to really standardize how you think about management analytics, the metrics that matter for the performance of the business, and then really developing, kind of the next step. If you look at performance management, better forecasting processes, better predictive processes, right? Not just data that express the actual or kind of the rear view window of performance. And then the last step, and we've talked about some of the concepts here today, is really having a more fully integrated set of, ERP, your planning and budgeting, a lot of your applications in the cloud. That could be, also the data that interacts with the ERP and the planning and budgeting application, but also the, things like accounting rules engines, where you can have additional attribution to have kind of your thick ledger concept versus at the GL level where you have maybe the thin or summarized accounting information. But then even deeper attribution. I know Workday uses a concept called work tags, where you can really start to look at data at a whether it's at a customer level or whether it's at a product level or a service level, kind of getting beneath that product line or that business level to really drive things around profitability, return, things like return on capital, those types of things. And then starting to embed some of the AI and some of the other advanced technology that we talked about as you analyze that data or model that data. So let's go to the next section then. We're going to try to keep this to 3 to 4 minutes so we can have some Q&A at the end. Let's talk, what does this all mean for the workforce, right? If you go to the next slide, the case for upskilling. So again, kind of bringing this back to not just a CFO survey, but a CEO survey. And you think about what's on their mind. A lot of it has, deep implications for the CFO or finance organization as well. And, we talked about, cost. You see some of that. You see the COVID-19 things. But if you look down at the last one on the left there, digital upskilling, right? I mean, talent, there is a huge war for talent across every industry at this point. And that's a huge priority for CEOs. And basically, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next page. What that means, really for finance is we see kind of a mindset shift, right, in terms of the types of talent that you need in your organization, and thinking about roles differently. And I'll come at this from a couple different angles. One is, think about entry-level workers coming out of college or graduate school. A lot of them have already been exposed to these tools that we talked about earlier, these citizen-led tools. They expect employers to be actively using them. If you're not using them, there's a question mark in their head as, is this organization, is this culture, are they moving in a direction that I want to be moving in, right? The things that are of interest to me. So that's kind of point number one. Point number two is, for the existing workforce, there's the need to upgrade the talent, right? Get away from the Excel spreadsheets, the macros, starting to embrace these tools, but also thinking about how you leverage them every day for continuous improvement to make your daily work, schedule that much better. That much more efficient. So you can move on to more innovative and analytical type solutions to deliver to your stakeholders, the business people that trust the information that you provide as a finance executive or professional. And the last part of that is we have a lot of HR organizations that are thinking about roles differently. If you think about how you define what skill sets does a controller need? What skill sets does a data analyst or business analyst need? Someone that's in the planning and budgeting function, whether it's in the business or in corporate, what skills do they need? And they're redefining the job. They're designing the jobs differently through a competency model, which includes basically training and the need to know some of these tools and these methods. How do you tell a story? How do you tell a story around financial performance? How do you basically prepare a business case, right? How do you deliver information to in an impactful way using some of these tools we talked about, whether it's Tableau or another visualization tool. So we've got up here on the page just to end, kind of 5 examples of, kind of different versions of roles that probably exist today in your organization. And we see HR working with finance more closely to kind of define, what does the future, role for finance look like? What are the skills that are required? And so with that, we're going to jump to the final polling question because we're very interested to see from this group, if we could go to the next polling question, if you've seen a similar trend, right? If you've seen your HR organization working with finance to think differently about the skills that you need, the competencies that are key to the finance professional success at your organization, and then what does that competency model look like, and how do you, nurture that talent and train that talent? So here's your 4 choices in terms of, level of sophistication around how digital's changed, perhaps your competency model for finance. We'll give people a few seconds. And while you're responding, I'll also just, we're about ready to enter the Q&A portion of. So if you haven't typed in a question, please feel free to do so, because we'd love to, have a little bit of Q&A for the last 5-7 minutes of the presentation. John, how do the results look?
Yep. I'm guessing in initial or advanced or partially implemented, the 2 of those make up about 75% of the respondents. The one thing interesting about this subject, Brett, that I like, or is interesting, is, the first 2/3 or first 3/4 of our presentation, we talked about enabling new technology and how it's going to change how people work. And then the last 25%, we talked about the changing roles based on the changing technology, and which one comes first? Are companies looking at in their human capital roles, looking at digital resources or individuals or employees that are going to fit with the move to a digital platform, or are they going with a digital platform and then fitting as they discover their needs? So I think there's probably a little bit of both going on. And again, I think it might be related to the size of the company, but the people and the technology and how they're married, I think is really important. I think that's it on the polling question. Thanks, everybody.
Looking at the questions here, John, I see a question. Maybe I'll put this one to you. Got a question here. Can you please elaborate on the term accounting rules engine or process execution tool? I know I use that term accounting rules engine. Maybe folks on the phone aren't necessarily that familiar with it.
Yeah, so I spoke a little bit about it earlier, but for Workday, we call it our BPF, our Business Process Framework. And we've got more than 4,000 customers, more than 1,500 in financials. And when customers are deploying, we deliver them more than 500 business processes that all of our other customers have already vetted. So they're, close to best-in-class business processes, everything from, onboarding personnel and HCM to paying personal trainer at Lifetime Fitness and payroll to accruing something in the general ledger. So every single step is all tied together with a security engine that's tight and controls that are tight. Every single touch point cannot be undone. So what that does is it truly automates all of your business processes. And I like to say you can step back and let the system do the work for you. But it's really automating steps that used to be done on, I would see to-do lists stapled to cubes or a closed checklist. All those now are automated and role-based. So individuals in a finance team or an HR team can almost step back and let processes happen automatically. So it's really neat, and it's when we demo to prospective customers, it's one of the highlights that we like to show, because it's all about efficiency and allowing more time to be on that analytical side, as we discussed, instead of just processing transactions.
Yeah, and there's one other question that's just come in about finance personnel and upskilling as we have coined it here. And the question is, do you know if colleges or universities are teaching some of these skills to its students, or do you think it's more of the on-the-job type education upskilling that we're describing here?
What do you think,
you want
Brett?
to take that, John? I've certainly got my view.
I'll start with what you've seen as well. But, for me, I think since we were an early adopter of Workday back in 2010 or a little bit earlier, back then, the data scientist was just in its infancy as far as a degree. But now data analytics and KPIs and metrics, everything that used to be a byproduct of accounting and finance is now being taught to as a key element. So I see a lot more on the education side, but there still is some individuals that are more on the job. So what do you see, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, we see both, right? I mean, I see a lot of finance and accounting majors with minors in data science and data analytics. Mm-hmm. They're using R, for statistical analysis. They're using Python as a way in coding in terms of how to manage data, large volumes of data, right? And basically mine that data. And I'm, one of the things that and then if I switch over to, what we're doing at PwC, for example, we have pushed really hard. We have a digital lab. We actually have a digital demand. It's called Digital on Demand. It's a product that we offer, which is full of accelerators from AI to robotics that people can kind of plug into as part of their center of excellence as they think about how they want to use these automation tools and deploy them, for good outcomes around automation. And it's twofold, right? That the solution is part training in terms of educating people on how these tools can be used with predefined solutions, but there's also an educational part of it too, in terms of how you explore the usage of these tools, how you can get trained up on them. I mean, just to end, I'll say, I've got a CFO that I work with here in North America for a global insurance company, and the CFO in North America has gone to training for Alteryx, which is it's a very user-friendly way to manage large volumes of data, apply business rules to the data, calculations to the data for purpose, fit for purpose usages or use cases if you're into analytics or reporting. So, I mean, I've seen this deep and wide, and I've seen it both at the university or college level, as well as PwC is training up its staff. We continue to focus on it. The kids coming out of school expect it, and our clients expect it as well.
Yeah. One thing, Brett, with the new generation coming into the workforce is, they were born and raised on technology. And, when we deployed an on-prem solution back at one of my previous companies in 2000, it came with a 40-pound, 800-page, booklet on how to run the system. Today, you don't have that. I mean, the expectation is it's a very intuitive system. So even the training and the curiosity clicking that people can do, it's almost a self-taught situation. And my Workday plug there is that's one of the examples that we have. We have training, but a lot of it's so intuitive, and that's what the new workforce expects. I think we're about at the end. Shivani, anything else?
Nope. Thank you. This marks the end of our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us on future webinars. You can find information about upcoming webinars in the resources widget. Don't forget to download your CPE certificate in the certification widget. Your CPE certificate will also be available to download in the thank you for attending email that will be sent within the next 24 hours. If you have any questions regarding CPE credits, please feel free to email conf@financialexecutives.org. Have a wonderful day, And again, thank you to all of our presenters for today's presentation.